Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a profoundly moving narrative about how just one terrifying night completely dismantled decades of deeply rooted prejudice on a quiet suburban street called Maple Drive. We're going to unpack this beautifully complex story that really explores the invisible walls we build around ourselves and what happens when the very people we unjustly shut out become the absolute only ones who can save us. Let's kick things off with this quote from Marcus. He's a 35-year-old single father and an emergency veterinarian. And this quote, it perfectly hooks into the core theme of the story we're about to unpack. Forgiveness is the only bridge that heals this world. This single sentence really embodies the grace and emotional intelligence required to overcome deeply ingrained societal divides. It totally sets the stage for a conflict that's as much about internal healing as it is about neighborhood relations.
Okay, moving into section 1, the wall of prejudice.
So here we see the stark juxtaposition at the absolute heart of our narrative. On one side, you have 68-year-old Eleanor Vance. Now, she's lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. But ever since losing her devoted husband, Harold, about 5 years ago, her life has really shrunk down into this lonely, isolated routine, heavily defined by quiet grief. And she is fiercely protective of her pristine space. Then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we have Marcus Vance. Oh, and by the way, no relation to Eleanor, just a crazy twist of fate. He's a 35-year-old single dad to a 7-year-old girl named Maya. He poured his entire life savings into this home, hoping to provide a safe, friendly environment, completely trusting in the fundamental goodness of people. Notice how the physical environment here perfectly mirrors the emotional one. Almost instantly, before a single introduction was even made, Eleanor judged Marcus and Maya. Old, deeply rooted generational prejudices started whispering in her mind. She judged Marcus based purely on the color of his skin, leaning heavily into unfounded biases and, frankly, unkind cultural stereotypes. So that physical, low wooden fence between their homes, it became a literal manifestation of her emotional prison, locking her heart behind this heavy steel door of ignorance and fear. Let's look at section 2, the shattered boundary. Watch how this tension builds. Throughout October, Marcus genuinely tries to extend an olive branch. Like in early October, he cheerfully rakes this thick blanket of maple leaves from Eleanor's sidewalk. Then, mid-October, he and little Maya bake fresh cinnamon apple muffins and bring them over with a bright smile. But look at Eleanor's response. She rejects every single gesture with this freezing politeness. She coldly states she doesn't accept unsolicited food and just shuts the door. She retreats into her dimly lit house, completely blind to the fact that her prejudice is turning her own home into a suffocating trap. And all of this silent tension just holds, right up until a fateful, blustery Tuesday gust of wind in late October changes absolutely everything. The real turning point happens when Marcus is fostering a timid, deaf rescue beagle named Barnaby. That gust of wind blows the gate open, the frightened puppy escapes, and tragically, he ends up right in Eleanor's sacred backyard. Barnaby frantically digs up Eleanor's heirloom red roses. Now, keep in mind, these roses were planted by her late husband on their 30th anniversary. They are literally her final living connection to him. So seeing them uprooted sends this profound wave of grief through Eleanor, which instantly morphs into blind, irrational rage. She storms over, unleashes years of pent-up bitterness, shouts prejudiced insults, and even cruelly threatens to have Marcus's veterinary foster license revoked. But look at how Marcus handles this. Despite the intense sting of her stereotyped words, Marcus just quietly shields his daughter behind his coat. He doesn't retaliate. Instead, he offers this breathtaking observation to Maya. We must never answer darkness with more darkness, because some hearts are so deeply wounded that they build walls just to keep from falling apart. I mean, wow. He looks right past Eleanor's ugly bias and sees a lonely, terrified soul, drowning in unresolved grief. He recognizes that her prejudice is basically just a toxic armor she uses to hold herself together. It's an absolute masterclass in extraordinary empathy under fire.
All right, section 3, the midnight blizzard.
So 2 weeks later, an unprecedented freezing Arctic storm slams the region. The power lines snap, it's pitch black, it's freezing. And that number 14? That's the age of Eleanor's Persian cat, Oliver. Oliver is the absolute last living creature Harold gave her. He's been her only constant companion through years of absolute solitude. Well, in the freezing darkness, Oliver suffers a severe, life-threatening asthma attack, which was triggered by the sudden drop in temperature. Eleanor tries to call the 24-hour vet, but the phone lines are completely dead. Whiteout conditions make the roads entirely impassable. She is trapped, and it really forces a terrifying question. What happens when the walls built to keep the world out finally trap you inside? In a moment of absolute despair, Eleanor realizes that the fortress of isolation and prejudice she spent years building has successfully kept the world out, sure, but now it's left her completely alone in the dark, watching her beloved companion fade away without a single soul to hear her cries. Which brings us to Section 4, the Bridge of Forgiveness. Swallowing her immense pride, Eleanor wraps dying Oliver in a blanket and actually stumbles through the deep snowdrifts in her slippers to Marcus's door, just weeping and begging for help. And guys, without a microsecond of hesitation, without any resentment or, triumph over her past cruelty, Marcus brings her inside. By battery-operated lantern light, he rapidly executes an emergency veterinary triage right on his kitchen table. Step 1, he administers a life-saving corticosteroid injection. Step 2, he applies fast-acting bronchodilators. And Step 3, he meticulously places a specialized pediatric oxygen mask over the tiny cat's face. For 3 hours, while this blizzard rages outside, he works tirelessly to save the animal. And while Marcus is working, this incredibly quiet, beautiful moment happens. Little Maya steps up. This 7-year-old girl wordlessly walks over to the shivering, sobbing woman and brings her a warm quilt and herbal tea. She sits on the floor holding Eleanor's icy, arthritic hands in her own warm ones. She extends pure, unconditional comfort to the very neighbor who had so viciously judged them just weeks prior. Sitting there in that candlelit kitchen, watching this Black family fight with every ounce of skill and heart to save her world, Eleanor's false stereotypes completely collapse. All those ugly assumptions she carried for decades, they just shatter under the crushing weight of their unconditional love. As dawn breaks and Oliver actually lets out a normal meow, his life saved, Eleanor falls to her knees and delivers this soul-shaking apology. I was so blind, so ignorant, so terribly cruel. I allowed hateful prejudices to poison my heart. Can you ever forgive a foolish, bitter old woman? Marcus, of course, gently lifts her to her feet, embraces her, and reminds her that forgiveness is the only bridge that heals the world.
Let's fast forward a bit to Section 5, Spring on Maple Drive.
Just look at the physical and emotional shift on the street now. The frozen winter of their relationship, characterized by that tall, dividing wooden fence built on fear and assumptions, is entirely gone. In its place, the blooming spring has arrived. They've literally installed a shared swinging garden gate right between their yards. Eleanor now sits on Marcus's porch, sharing those once-rejected cinnamon pastries, and the heirloom rose garden is blooming more magnificently than ever, co-tended by Eleanor and her new devoted gardening apprentice, Maya. The ultimate takeaway from this explainer is precisely this. Racial discrimination and prejudice are really just blinders. They completely rob us of our shared humanity. When we find the courage to tear down our biases, just as Eleanor eventually did, and look at one another with empathy, respect, and unconditional kindness, we discover how deeply connected we truly are. True family isn't defined by our background or the color of our skin. It is defined entirely by the love we choose to share. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative question to think about. What invisible fences are you currently building in your own life, and what would it take to turn them into swinging gates? Think about your own community interactions, maybe the assumptions you might unknowingly carry, and the bridges of forgiveness you have yet to build. It's never too late to open the gate, right? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep learning.